This makes it easier on me when I'm putting them online. Chapter 29, Nation Building in Africa and the Middle East. Challenges of building up the Middle East. We'll start with Africa. European nations at the end of World War II realized colonialism was over. African nations were given their independence and they were encouraged to, hey, try democracy. They were not ready for democracy. But what was so typical, and my wife and I did some, well, we edited a paper by an African man who was writing for publication. Typically, an African nation would get its independence and immediately try to set up a socialistic government that would fail. Another dictator would take over and he'd try to set up a socialistic government that would fail. And the next dictator would set up a socialistic government that would fail. And you wonder, when are these people going to learn socialism doesn't work? Moscow would often move in and promise to help them. But African people had little experience with democracy and they were not ready for it. Mostly the African people were non-violent, but in Kenya there was a gang of Africans called the Mau. The Mau would resort to terrorism. Mau terrorism alarmed Europeans, even though most of the terrorism was actually against other Africans. You don't hear much about the Mau anymore. Egypt did not like the British to rule. But Egypt did not like their local palace government either. Finally, an army coup overthrew Farouk, King Farouk, ending 5,000 years of rule by kings in Egypt, and a republic was established in Egypt. Algeria eventually got rid of the French. Algeria was looked on as part of France for a while, but the Algerians began to practice terrorism and scared the French people out, so the French all left Algeria and went back to France. All right, South Africa. South Africa was the last country on earth to have a constitution that openly called for apartheid.
You say it was the last what?
The last country that actually openly was racist. Apartheid, their constitution required that only white people could vote and own property and hold office. And again, this was to last folk until 1990. The rest of the world came down on them, condemned them. They would not allow South Africa to participate in Olympic Games or other activities. And the South African white people felt the pressure to give in. And finally, they gave in. All right, the two men, F.W. de Klerk was white, Nelson Mandela was black. They finally got together. And of course, with a 90% black majority, Nelson Mandela was the elected president, and he remained president until the day he died. F.W. de Klerk left office, of course. But that these two men, F.W. de Klerk and Nelson Mandela, worked together to turn control of Africa over to the African majority. I have heard rumors, which I'm not prepared to verify, that a lot of white property is being taken over by blacks, and but again, I'm not prepared to verify this. Race discrimination was really bad in South Africa throughout the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. All right. Africa has had a really tough time industrializing. They don't have a problem with pollution as much because they don't have industry. So the air in Africa is not going to breathe smoke-filled air like you do in China or like you used to in some big cities in the United States. They don't have a lot of industries. There is no big steel industry, but Africa has had its problems. One big problem was the spread of AIDS. And the spread of AIDS was so bad in Africa that any businessman who hired Africans had to hire 3 of them in one position because he knew that one of them was going to die of AIDS before he could be trained. The second was going to have to quit work to take care of someone who had AIDS. And maybe the third one could actually work for him. But AIDS spread throughout Africa. Finally, with help from the United States was able to give Africans the drug cocktail that's needed to extend the life of a person who has AIDS. Now, there is still no cure for AIDS, but today, persons who are HIV positive who have AIDS can survive and live a somewhat normal life thanks to a cocktail of drugs that will help your body fight the diseases that your body cannot no longer fight on its own. Democracy has rarely been achieved in Africa, nor has it lasted long. Economic prosperity has proven difficult. Their experiment, Angola and Ethiopia have tried communism. In Angola, Cuban troops moved in and took over Angola and made it a communist country. Cuban troops sent by Fidel Castro. Another victory of the communists. Well, it wasn't. The Angola turning over to communists happened just as Vietnam was also falling to the communists. But their experiment with communism has failed. There are a few Africans who are extremely, extremely rich, while most of them are very poor. Again, folks, I mean, if you read about Africa, there's not much that your book has to say that's good about it. You still have old tribal loyalties and tribes fighting among themselves. And these fights often result in a lot of starvation. Again, very difficult to find a whole lot of good to say about what's going on in Africa. Africa has more natural resources than any other continent on the face of the earth. Oh yes, I must say Nelson Mandela and Dr. Martin Luther King were friends. Close friends. They were both fighting a similar fight. King in the United States, Nelson Mandela in Africa. All right. Christianity has made some headway in Africa, and it's helped to westernize some Africans. Some people in their bigger African cities are westernizing, but in rural areas, rural Africa, jungle Africa, change is slower. Now, the Sudan. Throughout all of known history, slavery has been a problem with Africa. And in recent times, well, there's 2 places. There were rumors that slavery was practiced in the Congo. That cannot be easily verified, but slavery was practiced in the Sudan for a good many years. The Sudan finally decided, or feared the United States was going to come in, so Sudan finally split into 2 countries. And I forget the name of it. Does anybody know the name of the country that was the new country was formed? Anybody have to know it?
North and South.
What's that?
One is north, another is south.
Yeah, one of them is north. Yeah, it's split north and south. The north one is Sudan. The south one is something else. And but there's still, the people there are starving. A lot of them. They're fighting among themselves. And to me, what I gather is a miserable existence in that part of Africa.
Professor?
Yes.
The south one just calls
It's
Republic
just
of
South
South
Sudan.
Sudan.
What's that?
The south one is just called Republic of South Sudan.
Republic of South Sudan? Oh, okay, thank you. Republic of South Sudan, all right. All right. Now, Your book mentions this, and folk, I know a little bit about this from firsthand experience. A lot of South American men will tell their girlfriends, I'm going to the big city and find work, and when I find work, I'll come and send for you, I'll come and get you. The man will go to the big city and never be heard from again. And leave the girlfriend or wife or whatever stranded, and he'll probably find another girl in the big city, and anyway, she never hears from him again. This is so very, very typical. The villagers look on the cities as a source of evil. Marriages in the countryside are often arranged. In short, your African people have had a very difficult time forming modern nation states. And a lot of Africans today are leaning away from westernization and toward Eastern ideals of obedience to authority. And that's because a lot of them are just tired of the liberalism that they get from the West, and of which they associate liberalism with licentiousness. Do your own thing. And they want authority. Socrates told us 2,300 years ago, when people have too much freedom, they will eventually start seeking authority, or they'll start wanting a dictatorship, or wanting a king, or wanting someone to take over. All right, moving from Africa to the Middle East. Your Middle Eastern countries have one thing in common: Islam. Yet they are constantly at war with each other. They have only one thing they agree on. They all agree that Israel must go. Israel has no right to exist. Again, they look for the day when Israel will be thrown into the sea and all of them drown. And Iran has vowed it's going to completely annihilate Israel and only take a few minutes to do it. They all hate Israel. And some people, if you're into theology, say the hatred goes all the way back to Jacob and his brother Esau, to his twin brother Esau, or even farther back to Abraham, who had two sons, Isaac and Ishmael. Yeah, it goes all the way back to that point. Anyway, now,
May I ask a question?
yes,
Not to be completely off topic or anything. For the sake of the lecture and notes and tests, do most of our tests come from what you're lecturing from, or a combination of the lecture and some of the reading in the book?
most of the tests will come from what I'm lecturing from.
Okay.
Yes.
But it is good if we have a book to go back and read that section,
Yes.
so we get clear
Because for one
understanding.
thing, you'll find out that what I'm lecturing is in the book,
Right,
if you have read
Okay.
the book.
thank you.
Okay. Now, here's the thing about this part of the world. During World War I, the Middle East sided with Germany, and of course, you know, Germany lost. During World War II, the Middle East sided with Germany again, and Germany lost. Then during the Cold War, these people sided with the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union lost. They found, well, we're not going to win unless we decide to fight for ourselves, because the people we're relying on to defeat our enemies always are losing. So we're going to have to do our own fighting. So they have resorted oftentimes to terrorism. In fighting in modern war, they have not done well. They have fought 4 wars with Israel. They fought in 1948, 1956, 1967, and 1973. And they have lost on all 4 fronts. Now the first war, the 1948 war, that was a close one. But Israel managed to win thanks to help of the United States. But the Arabs said, well, wait, time is on our side. Well, it hasn't been. Time has actually been on the side of the Westerners. And a lot of that is the sheer lack of inventiveness on the part of the Arabs. They have not invented anything to speak of in the last 1,000 years. And to think that's a shame, because they were once ahead of Europe, but they fell behind. Of all the inventions we have, the microprocessor, the transistor, the vacuum tube, the automobile, the airplane, none of it was invented by the Arab world. And they have spent their time fighting among themselves and have not made any progress toward anything that would better the rest of mankind. The Arab states tried to form a union, the Arab League, but it failed. Some of your old maps will not show Egypt as Egypt, they'll show it as the United Arab Republic, UAR, but that failed also. Now, about the Jewish people moving into Israel, a couple of things I want to say about that, folks. Every human being alive today, including us in America, even if you're not American, every human alive today is living on land that his ancestors took from someone else. This is simply a fact of life. And you can argue with it and say that it's wrong all you want to. There are no exceptions. The Russian people are living on land their ancestors took from other people. The Middle Easterners themselves are living on land their ancestors took from other people. We in America are living on land that our ancestors took from the American Indians, etc., etc. Everybody is living on land that their ancestors took from someone else. Was it wrong for the Jews to move in and take over the home of their ancestors? All right. When the Jews initially moved in, they moved into land that the Arabs were not using. Also Palestine, that was the name of the land before it became Israel. Palestine had not been independent, I mean, since the days the Jews had it. The Romans conquered it. Then after that, the Eastern Roman Empire had it. Then after that, the Arabians conquered it. Then the Syrians conquered it. Eventually the Turks conquered it. It became part of the Ottoman Empire. It never was an independent state. So what right do they have to claim that we want an independent state of Palestine when they have not had one since the days of the Philistines 3,000 years ago, or thereabouts? I mean, I may be exaggerating a little bit. The word Palestine is believed to come from the word Philistine, the original inhabitants of that area. Anyway, in 1948, in May, the State of Israel was formed by a UN mandate. Now, folk, there has never, ever been a nation formed more legally. In May 1948, the United Nations met in the General Assembly, and they voted to partition the land of Palestine to where the Jews could have unoccupied areas and the Arabs could keep the land that they were on. In other words, instead, I'm going to draw a crude map like of Palestine. In other words, this might be a Jewish territory here and another Jewish territory here and here and here and here. This would consist of the Jewish state of Israel, these areas, and the rest of it would be Palestine. The United Nations has never, ever before, or as far as I know since, voted to make a nation. But they did this time. So who voted for the partition? 2/3 of the nations of the world. Latin America, almost every country, if not all the countries in Latin America, voted for the partition. Russia, of all people, Joseph Stalin, he's been called an anti-Semite, but he really wasn't. He voted for the partition. A strange bedfellow for the Jews, because the Jews introducing the world to their God, but nevertheless, Russia voted for the partition. Germany, which had just killed 6 million Jews, they voted for the partition. Of course, Great Britain, United States, France, China before it became taken over by the communists, they voted for the partition. China voted for it, much of the Asian countries. The only countries that voted against it were the Middle Eastern countries, but they were outvoted. When the creation of Israel was announced, the Arab countries vowed, we're going to send them to the sea, we're going to drown them all. The Israelis got together, fought a war. The Arabs quit fighting in 1948. But then in 1956, the Arabs fought again. This fight was very one-sided about. The Arab armies were simply blown off the battlefield. destroyed. In 1967, I'm too young to remember the 1956 war, but in 1967, right as I was graduating from high school, June 6th to June 10th, right after my graduation, the Arabs invaded Israel again, and the war was even more lopsided than the 1956 war had been. Arab soldiers were taking off their boots and tearing through the sand, running away from Israel. Israeli aircraft destroyed almost every airplane that the Arabs had. All right, the Arabs still said time is on our side. No, what happened was the Israelis developed better tanks, developed better planes, and yes, folks, Israel has a nuclear bomb. Officially, they'll tell you they don't. But everybody seems to know that they actually do. If any of you have heard anything about that, everybody's welcome. But officially, they say we don't have it. Well, anyway, be that as it may, today's tanks can be moving at 40 miles an hour, and a computer sights the target. Humans can't shoot a target when a tank is bouncing along at 40 miles an hour, and you can't shoot a target and miss, but these computers can zero in on a target and hit it every time. These kind of weapons the Arabs do not have. Then finally in 1973, there was a war which the Arabs had enough sense to quit fighting when the tide began to turn in Israel's favor. From 1973 till today, there has been no further war. A bunch of Palestinians fled to Jordan and to Lebanon, and they are still there. It changed the demographics of both Jordan and Lebanon. Jordan's population had once been Bedouin, that is, people living in tents and following and leading the herds around. Today, Jordan's population is now a majority of Palestinians. A lot of Palestinians remain in the desert, and they've refused Israel's offer to live in Israel. They say, we're not going to become part of that. A lot of Arabs claim the Palestinians have a right to the territory occupied by Israel, and Israel has no right to exist. But again, folks, no other nation was created by a vote from the United Nations, the UN mandate. There's never been a nation created more legally than the nation of Israel was. That even includes the United States. All right. The PLO, Palestinian Liberation Organization, was formed to try to speak for Palestinian interests. Yasser Arafat led the PLO for a while. The PLO was guilty of carrying out a lot of terrorism. Now, eventually Yasser Arafat died, possibly of, well, we don't know. I better not say. We don't know how he died, but he died of an undisclosed ailment. The PLO still exists, but the terrorism against Israel has largely stopped. And folks, here's the story on it. Back in 1998 and 1999 and 2000 and 2001, every 3 months, someone would go to an Israeli crowded place and blow themselves up. They'd have nails, a bunch of gunpowder with nails attached to the body, and they'd blow themselves to bits. And young kids would trade, it was like our young boys used to trade baseball cards. They would trade cards about how good this man was, how he blew himself, and how many people he killed. This went on. It has largely stopped today. Israel did something that's very politically incorrect. They put the Arab people behind fences. The fences are 9 foot tall with a bunch of barbed wire and broken glass at the top. And I've seen some of the fences in Israel. The broken glass is really, really mean stuff that will cut you all to pieces if you walk on it. But they put these people behind fences, and then, oh yeah, they're allowed out. But they can't come out without meeting up with bomb-sniffing dogs. The terrorists, or let's put it this way, the Palestinians appealed to the World Court. The World Court ruled in the Palestinians' favor. Israel said, fury on the World Court, we are the ones who are being blown to pieces by these people. We're not going to put up with this anymore. So to this day, the Palestinians have to live inside fenced areas. Basically, they're caged. They can come out only after going through a process, and then when they return, they're checked out again. And there's no good way they have of getting the material they need to make bombs, no good way they have of blowing themselves to bits. And taking as many people with them as they can. All right. But again, some of you might not have heard of this because it happened, a lot of this was going on before a lot of your time. But, all right. Israel has numerous political parties, so they have to govern, all the governments have to govern by trying to get a coalition of parties. You know, if your party gets elected, you can only govern if you get as many parties as you can get on your side. Okay, folk, we'll take up with Egypt in a few minutes. Be back in 10 minutes.